The surgeon looked at the retired firefighter and said nothing. In that silence was a $67,000 emergency surgery bill and a man with no insurance. He had minutes to decide, but then the doctor picked up the phone. And within 1 hour, 3 strangers and a medical nonprofit pledged to cover every single cent. Because 30 years ago, this man ran into a burning building when they couldn't. The patient was Robert Bear Delaney. For 28 years, he ran into fires for his community in Hartford, Connecticut. Now, at 68, a ruptured appendix was threatening to take everything because Bear had no health insurance. This is the story of the 90 minutes that changed his life, and why, in America today, the kindness of strangers is sometimes the only safety net left. Robert Delaney retired from the Hartford Fire Department in 2004 with a bad knee, a full pension, and one critical mistake. He let his health insurance lapse. The premiums for a retiree plan were over $800 a month. On a fixed income, it was the bill he decided to risk. For 16 years, that gamble held. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in March, a searing pain in his lower right abdomen doubled him over in his kitchen on Enfield Street. This was Bear Delaney. The nickname came from his size and his calm, not from any ferocity. In the firehouse, he was the steady one, the man who would carry an elderly woman down a ladder before going back for her cat. He served on Ladder Company 9 for 28 years. He was there for the Swift factory warehouse fire in '93, where he suffered second-degree burns on his arms pulling 2 co-workers from a collapse. He never called it heroic. He called it Tuesday. But the body keeps score. The pension didn't cover the physical toll. Arthritis settled in the burned shoulders. The bad knee from a fall-off an engine got worse. And at 68, living alone in the same ranch house he'd bought as a young firefighter, his entire financial safety net was the equity in that home and about $37,000 in a savings account meant to last the rest of his life. The drive to St. Francis Hospital that Tuesday took 20 minutes through a blur of pain. He walked into the ER, which is what you do when you've walked away from burning buildings. He gave his name. He showed his driver's license. And when the registrar asked for his insurance card, Bear said the 3 words that change everything in an American hospital: "I don't have any." The federal law known as EMTALA meant they had to treat him. They rushed him through triage. The diagnosis was swift and severe: a ruptured appendix. Sepsis was beginning. The surgeon on call, Dr. Aris Thorne, laid it out plainly. "Mr. Delaney, you need an emergency laparoscopy. Now, if we don't operate within the hour, the infection could become fatal." Bear asked the only question that mattered to him: how much? Dr. Thorne, a man in his 40s with the tired eyes of someone who has had this conversation too many times, didn't sugarcoat it. The facility fee, my fee, anesthesia, antibiotics, a minimum 2-night stay, you're looking at between $60,000 and $70,000, possibly more if there are complications. The number hung in the sterile air of the pre-op room: $67,000, more than his entire savings account, a debt that would force the sale of his home. Bear looked at the surgeon, his face pale from more than just the infection. "Doc," he said, his voice gravelly and quiet, "I can't pay that. I'm sorry. You should just let me go." In that moment, Dr. Aris Thorne did something extraordinary. He didn't quote hospital policy. He didn't talk about payment plans. He went completely silent. He looked at this gaunt, proud man in a hospital gown and he saw something. Maybe it was the bearing of a man used to responsibility. Maybe it was the utter defeat in his eyes. Thorne held up one finger. "Wait, just wait right here." He stepped out of the room. This is where the clock started, the 90 minutes. But the first call Dr. Thorne made wasn't to a charity. It was to the hospital's financial counselor, Lisa Cho. He needed the full story. "Who is this patient?" Lisa pulled up the file. "Robert Delaney, retired, no insurance." Then she saw a field that had been entered by an intake nurse, a field most people leave blank. Previous occupation. It said firefighter. Years of service, 28. Dr. Thorne's next move was against standard protocol. He asked Lisa to dig deeper, not into credit, but into local history. Was there anything else? Sometimes, in small cities like Hartford, stories linger. Lisa, whose uncle had been a police officer, understood the assignment. She made a few calls. She searched old news archives on her computer, and she found it. A newspaper clipping from the Hartford Courant, dated July 12, 1994. A house fire on Westland Street. Photos of firefighters battling a blaze that had engulfed a duplex. The caption named several firefighters who rescued residents. One name was highlighted. Firefighter Robert Delaney, credited with carrying 2 children and their mother to safety from the second-floor rear apartment. Lisa printed the article. She also found a brief follow-up piece from a week later. The family, the Millers, had expressed gratitude to the firefighters at a city council meeting. Dr. Thorne held the faded printout. He looked at the date, 30 years ago, almost to the day. He then asked Lisa for one more thing, a list of any patients he had personally treated in the last 5 years who lived on or near Westland Street. It was a shot in the dark, a hunch. What happened next defies belief. Lisa cross-referenced addresses. She found 3 former patients. A woman named Patricia Miller, now in her 50s, who Dr. Thorne had treated for a severe asthma attack. An older man named Henry Vance, who had survived a heart attack under Thorne's care. And a younger man, David Chen, whose son Thorne had treated for a broken arm. All lived within a 3-block radius of that 1994 fire. Dr. Thorne took a breath. He picked up the phone in Lisa's office. He dialed the first number. Patricia Miller answered. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne from St. Francis Hospital. I'm calling about a man named Robert Delaney. Do you remember that name?" There was a long pause on the line. Then, a voice thick with emotion. "The firefighter. He saved my family. Is he okay?" This was the spark. But to cover a $67,000 surgery, a spark isn't enough. You need a furnace. And Dr. Thorne, with a patient's life literally on the clock, was about to light one. He told Patricia the situation. No insurance. Facing a catastrophic bill. He didn't ask for money, not yet. He just stated the facts. And then he heard the words that would change the course of the next hour. She said, "Tell me what to do." He called Henry Vance next. Then David Chen. Each reaction was the same, instant recognition. A debt remembered from 3 decades past, a willingness to help. But they were ordinary people. They couldn't write checks for $20,000. This is where the story twists again, because David Chen, the youngest of the 3, worked as a paralegal for a local law firm, and he said something crucial. "Doctor, have you called the First Responder Health Fund?" It was a medical non-profit Thorne had heard of in passing. They covered copays and premiums for active first responders. But David explained. His firm had done pro bono work for them. Their charter had a little-known clause. In cases of extreme hardship, they could authorize grants for retired first responders facing emergency medical costs. It was a legacy fund, fueled by donations from grateful families. It was small, it was selective, and it was Robert Delaney's only chance. Dr. Thorne now had 45 minutes before Bear's surgery window closed. He had 3 strangers ready to pledge what they could, and he had the name of a non-profit that might bridge the impossible gap. He walked back to the pre-op room, where Bear Delaney lay waiting for a verdict that would decide his future. Bear looked up, expecting to see the resigned face of a man delivering bad news. But Dr. Thorne's expression was different. It was focused. It was intense. He looked Bear directly in the eye. "Mr. Delaney, we're going to operate right now. Don't worry about the bill." Then, without another word of explanation, he turned to the nurse. "Prep him. I'm making one more call." And he walked out again, leaving a retired firefighter more confused than ever as the clock ticked down to 0. That one more call was to a number in Washington, D.C. The executive director of the First Responder Health Fund, Miranda Cruz, answered on the 4th ring. Dr. Thorne spoke fast. He had maybe 5 minutes of her time. He gave her the facts. Retired firefighter, Robert Delaney, 28 years of service. Ruptured appendix on the table right now. No insurance. Bill, $67,000. And then he delivered the kicker. "We have 3 former patients. Civilians he saved from a fire 30 years ago, ready to contribute whatever they can." Silence on the line. Then Miranda Cruz asked one question. "Did you say 30 years? Confirm the date of the fire for me." Thorne, standing in the hallway, relayed the date from the newspaper article. July 12, 1994. He heard the sound of a keyboard clicking rapidly. Miranda spoke again, her voice changed. "Doctor, you need to put me on speakerphone and get a financial counselor in the room. Now." Back in Lisa Cho's office, Thorne put the call on speaker. Miranda's voice filled the small space. "Our fund was founded in 2008, but it was seeded by a family donation made in 2006. That donation was specifically earmarked in memory of a Hartford firefighter who saved 2 children in July of '94. The family wished to remain anonymous, but the directive was clear: help firefighters when the system fails them. Lisa Cho pulled up the hospital's own donor records. A search for donations tagged firefighter or first responder around 2006, and there it was, a $75,000 donation to the St. Francis Hospital Charitable Care Fund, dated November 10, 2006. Donor, anonymous. Memo line, in gratitude to Ladder 9. The pieces were crashing together. The anonymous family from the 1994 fire had donated to the hospital years later. That donation had helped seed the very national nonprofit Thorn was now calling. It was a closed loop of gratitude, hidden in plain sight for 18 years. Miranda confirmed it. Our founding capital included that gift, which means Robert Delaney isn't just eligible for a grant. He's the literal reason this fund exists. But there's a problem. The problem was scale. The fund could authorize an emergency grant of up to $25,000. The three former patients, Patricia, Henry, and David, had quickly pledged a combined $11,000. That was $36,000. They were still $31,000 short. And the hospital's own charity care program, funded by that anonymous gift, had specific income thresholds. Bear's pension, while modest, might technically put him just over the line for a full waiver. Time was evaporating. Bear was being wheeled toward the operating room. Dr. Thorn had a choice: authorize the surgery and hope the money materializes, which could put his own standing at risk, or delay and risk Bear's life. He looked at Lisa. What's the absolute bottom line? What does the hospital actually need to break even on this procedure? Lisa ran a cost model. After factoring in typical Medicare reimbursement rates, which the hospital would not be getting, the bare minimum to cover supplies, staff, and facility use was roughly $48,000. They had $36,000 pledged. They needed $12,000 more, and they had about 20 minutes before anesthesia began. This is when David Chen, the paralegal, called Lisa's desk phone. He had an idea, a dangerous, unconventional idea. He told Lisa to pull up the local news affiliate's tip line. What if we go public, right now, not for a handout, but to find others? Hartford is a city of stories. What if there are more people out there who remember firefighter Delaney? It was a nuclear option. It would violate patient privacy. It could create a media circus, but it was also the only option left. Dr. Thorn made a third critical decision. He called the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Evelyn Reed. He explained the situation in 60 seconds. A retired public servant, a literal foundational donor to their charity fund, a 30-year-old act of courage now facing a financial death sentence. He asked for a blanket waiver on the privacy rules, just for 1 hour, to allow a controlled, factual public appeal. Dr. Reed, a former emergency physician herself, listened. She asked one question: is the patient conscious enough to consent? Thorn ran to the pre-op bay. Bear, barely conscious from pain medication, looked at him. Bear, we found a way to help with the bill, but we need to tell your story. Is that okay? Can we tell people what you did? Bear Delaney, through the fog, nodded once. Just tell them I was just doing my job. Consent secured. Dr. Reed gave a 5-word authorization. You have 1 hour, go. At 10:42 a.m., David Chen, using his firm's media contacts, sent a succinct, legally vetted email to the assignment desk at the local CBS affiliate. The subject line: urgent, community call for retired Hartford firefighter in surgery. It contained no medical details, only this: retired Hartford firefighter Robert Bear Delaney, a 28-year veteran of Ladder 9, is undergoing emergency surgery at St. Francis Hospital this hour. In 1994, he saved a family from a fire on Westland Street. He is now facing insurmountable medical debt. A fund is being established. If you know him, if he helped you, contributions are being coordinated through the First Responder Health Fund. He copied 2 local radio stations and the Hartford Courant. Then he, Patricia Miller, and Henry Vance began posting the same message on neighborhood Facebook groups. Remember the Westland Street fire? The firefighter who saved the Miller family needs our help today. What happened next was a quiet tsunami. The first call to the hospital's switchboard came at 10:49. A woman whose father had been pulled from a car wreck by firefighter Delaney in 2001. She pledged $500. The second call was from a retired police dispatcher who remembered coordinating for Ladder 9. She pledged 200. But the third call was the one that changed the math. It came into Miranda Cruz's office at the nonprofit. The man on the line wouldn't give his name. He said he'd seen the alert on a community page. He said, "Tell the firefighter that the boy from the second-floor apartment is all grown up, and he's good for $10,000. The boy from the second-floor apartment. That was the Miller family's son, Michael, who was 8 years old in 1994. Patricia Miller had never mentioned him specifically. He had moved away years ago. No one had thought to find him, and yet he found them. His $10,000, combined with the other pouring pledges, pushed them over the $48,000 threshold. By 11 a.m., as Bear Delaney was under anesthesia and the first incision was being made, the total pledged sat at $52,700. It was enough. Lisa Cho immediately began the paperwork to lock in the hospital's charity care contribution for the remaining balance. The system, through a dizzying combination of legal loopholes, historic gratitude, and raw human generosity, had bent just enough to catch one man. But in the operating room, a new problem was emerging. Dr. Thorne, now scrubbed in, found the situation was worse than the scans showed. The rupture was more severe. Sepsis was advanced. This wouldn't be a simple 2-night stay. This would be a fight for life in the ICU, with costs that could double. The $48,000 minimum was now obsolete. The real cost was skyrocketing toward $100,000 in real time. And at that exact moment, in the hospital administration suite, the chief financial officer was just seeing the morning's charity care report. A flag popped up for a high-cost, uninsured procedure being approved under the discretionary fund. He saw the name, Robert Delaney. He saw the attending physician, Dr. Aris Thorne, and he saw the line that made his blood run cold. Pledge coordination involving external media solicitation. He picked up the phone to call Dr. Reed. This wasn't over. The real battle, the bureaucratic one, was just beginning, and it threatened to undo everything the community had just built in one frantic, miraculous hour. The call from the CFO, Mark Garrity, wasn't a request. It was a summoning. Dr. Evelyn Reed was to come to his office immediately, and she was to bring every piece of paper related to the Delaney case. Garrity was a numbers man, brought in 2 years prior to shore up the hospital's shaky finances. He saw the world in margins, not miracles. He had the charity care report on his screen. Dr. Reed stood before his desk. He didn't offer her a seat. "Evelyn, what in God's name is happening in my emergency department? We have a physician soliciting donations from the public for an individual patient, using hospital resources, possibly violating HIPAA. This is a catastrophic liability." Dr. Reed remained calm. "Mark, the patient is a retired city firefighter with 28 years of service. He's septic on the table right now. The community response is extraordinary. We have consent." Garrity tapped the screen. "I don't care if he saved the Pope. We have policies, we have income thresholds for charity care. This media circus sets a precedent. What happens tomorrow when another uninsured patient needs a heart transplant? Do we put them on the news too? This isn't a crowdfunding platform, it's a hospital." He had a point, a cold, bureaucratic point. The hospital's charity care fund, while substantial, was a finite resource. Every dollar given to Robert Delaney was a dollar not given to someone else. And the method, public solicitation, was a grenade in the careful machinery of hospital finance. Garrity's directive was clear: shut it down. Inform the nonprofit and the donors that all external fundraising must cease immediately. The hospital will process Mr. Delaney's application through normal channels, which will take 7 to 10 business days. In the meantime, he is responsible for the bill. 7 to 10 days. Bear would be out of the ICU by then, facing a bill growing by thousands every hour. Dr. Reed left the office, her mind racing. She couldn't countermand the CFO on finance, but she had one card left to play: medical necessity. She went straight to the ICU nursing station. She pulled up Bear's real-time vitals. His blood pressure was being supported by 3 different medications. His white blood cell count was catastrophically high. The surgery had been more complex than anyone anticipated. Dr. Thorne's notes estimated a minimum ICU stay of 5 days, followed by a week on a medical floor. The projected cost, was now $114,000. The $52,000 pledged was now less than half of what was needed, and with Garrity's freeze on external fundraising, that money was in limbo. The community's goodwill was about to hit a brick wall of hospital policy. But the community didn't know that yet. While administrators argued, the story was escaping into the wild. The local CBS affiliate ran a brief segment during their noon news cut-in, "Retired Hartford firefighter in fight for life and against medical debt." It didn't name the hospital, but it didn't need to. The city of Hartford is a small town in a big city's clothing. The switchboard lit up, not just with pledges, but with stories. A man called Saying Bear had pulled his dog from a frozen pond in '98. A teacher called Saying Bear had visited her third-grade class every year for a decade to talk about fire safety. A waitress from a diner near the old firehouse called to say he always tipped 50% and asked about her kids. These weren't just donations, they were affidavits of character, a public record of a life lived in service, and they were all being logged by a tearful Lisa Cho, who was now technically violating the CFO's order by even taking the calls. Then at 1:15 p.m., the story found its way to a city councilwoman, Maria Flores. Her district included the old Ladder 9 house. She knew Bear Delaney by reputation. She made 2 calls. The first was to the hospital's public relations office, asking for a comment. The second was to the office of the fire chief, asking if the department had any assistance programs for retired members in medical crisis. The answer from the fire department was a grim reality check. Retiree health care was the individual's responsibility. There was a small benevolent fund for active members killed or disabled in the line of duty. For a retiree 16 years out, sick from a ruptured appendix, nothing. But Councilwoman Flores had a platform. At 2 p.m., she posted on her official social media, "Hartford, one of our own needs us. Retired firefighter Robert Bear Delaney saved countless lives, including children, over a 28-year career. Now he's in the fight of his life at St. Francis, facing ruinous debt. I am calling on the hospital's administration to work with the community, not against it, to find a solution. Stand with Bear." The hashtag took off. Local reporters now had a second angle, not just a human interest story, but a potential political struggle between a popular city institution and a profitable hospital. The hospital's PR office, blindsided, called Mark Garrity in a panic. Pressure was mounting from the outside, but inside the ICU, a more immediate drama was unfolding. Bear's body was struggling. He developed atrial fibrillation, a dangerous irregular heartbeat. He needed a specialized medication that cost $800 a dose. He needed another CT scan. The cost ticked upward, $120,000. Dr. Thorne, still in his surgical scrubs, was paged back to the ICU as he passed the administration wing. He was stopped by an assistant. "Mr. Garrity needs to see you. Now." This was the confrontation. The doctor who acted versus the accountant who balanced. Garrity didn't yell. He presented a spreadsheet. "Dr. Thorne, your patient's care, as currently projected, will result in an operating loss for this hospital of approximately $89,000. Your actions, however well-intentioned, have created a scenario where we cannot legally accept restricted donations for an individual patient's bill without a mountain of paperwork that takes weeks. You have put this institution in an impossible position." Thorne was exhausted. He looked at the spreadsheet, then at Garrity. "What is your solution, Mark? Let him die. He's stable for now. We could transfer him to the county hospital." It was the nuclear option. Medically transferring an unstable, septic ICU patient is incredibly risky. It's done for one reason: when a hospital decides it cannot or will not eat the cost of care. It's called a wallet biopsy, and it is the ultimate failure of the system. Thorne said the only thing he could: "If you transfer him in this condition and he dies, I will testify at the malpractice hearing and the press conference that follows that it was a financial transfer, not a medical one." A standoff. In that moment, Dr. Evelyn Reed entered, her phone in her hand. She'd been on a call. "Gentlemen," she said, "we have a new development." That call was from the office of the anonymous donor, the family from 1994. The room went still. Reed continued. They wish to remain unnamed, but they have been made aware of the situation. They have reviewed the terms of their original donation to the hospital's charitable fund. Their lawyer points out that the gift was unrestricted, meant to aid the hospital in providing care to those in need, with a suggested preference for first responders. There is no legal barrier to it being used for this specific case. Then she delivered the hammer, and they have instructed their family foundation to issue a matching grant. Whatever the community raises in the next 24 hours, up to $100,000, they will double it. Mark Garrity sat back in his chair. The math just changed violently. The community had unofficially pledged nearly $60,000 already. If that was matched, that was $120,000, more than enough to cover the spiraling costs. And it would come through the foundation, then to the nonprofit, then to the hospital as a general donation, perfectly clean, perfectly legal. The bureaucratic wall was crumbling. But there was a condition. The family's lawyer was clear. The match was contingent on the hospital publicly committing to process firefighter Delaney's charity care application immediately, today, and approving it in full based on the extraordinary circumstances. They wanted a guarantee, no more talk of transfers, no more delays. Garrity, the numbers man, ran the calculation. A $100,000 match against a $120,000 bill. The hospital would still lose money, but far less, and the PR disaster would be averted. The story becomes one of heroic community and institutional compassion, not bureaucratic failure. He looked at Dr. Thorne, then at Dr. Reed. Fine, process the application, approve it, but this ends here. This is a one-time exception, do you understand? Down in the ICU, Bear Delaney was unconscious, fighting an infection, unaware that his life's work had just fought a battle for him in a corporate office. The money was now there. The hospital was on board. The community had triumphed. But in medicine and in life, just when you think the crisis is over, the body reveals its final, cruelest surprise. At 4 p.m., Bear's kidneys began to fail. Kidney failure, in medical terms, acute renal injury secondary to septic shock. It meant dialysis. It meant the bill, now assuredly covered, would balloon again. But more urgently, it meant Bear Delaney's body was failing system by system. The financial battle had been won. The medical war was entering its darkest hour. Dr. Thorne called the nephrologist, the kidney specialist. At 4:05 p.m., they started continuous renal replacement therapy 2 hours later. A gentle, slow dialysis that runs for 24 hours a day in the ICU. The cost added another $1,200 a day. The anonymous family's matching grant, now fully activated, didn't flinch. For 3 days, Bear hovered in that narrow space between critical and stable. The community vigil went digital. The Stand With Bear hashtag became a thread of well-wishes, old photos from firehouse open houses, and stories from people he'd forgotten he'd helped. A former rookie he'd trained posted a picture of Bear teaching him how to properly clean hose. A woman posted that he'd bought her daughter a new bike after hers was stolen from their porch. The stories were a kind of medicine, a proof of life lived that counteracted the sterile dread of the ICU. On the 4th day, his creatinine levels, the measure of kidney function, began to fall, slowly, agonizingly slowly, but they fell. On the 5th day, they removed the breathing tube. Bear Delaney opened his eyes for the first time in a week. He was weak, confused, tethered to machines. His first coherent words, whispered to the ICU nurse, were not about pain. He asked, "Did they get the cat out?" The nurse, bewildered, later learned from Lisa Cho that in the 1994 fire, after getting the family out, Bear had gone back in for their pet. It was a detail omitted from the newspaper article. His mind, in trauma, had returned to the oldest debt. Recovery was a brutal, incremental climb. Transfer from the ICU to step-down unit, then to a regular medical floor, learning to walk again with a physical therapist. Each step cost money. The final bill, from the moment he walked into the ER to the day he was discharged, totaled $189,417.56. And every single cent was covered. The community pledges, solidified in that 24-hour matching window, totaled $86,000. The anonymous family's foundation matched it, as promised, $172,000. The First Responder Health Fund grant covered the remaining $17,000 with change to spare. The hospital's charity care office, under Mark Garrity's reluctant approval, processed the application as a formality. The balance was zero. On a bright April morning, 31 days after he entered the hospital, Robert Delaney was discharged. He wore the same clothes he'd arrived in, now hanging loose on his frame. Dr. Thorne walked him to the doors. Bear stopped, turned, and looked at the doctor. He had been briefed in broad strokes on what had happened. The articles, the donors, the fight. "Doc," he said, his voice still rough, "they tell me you did all this." Thorne shook his head. "No, I made a phone call. You built the network that answered it over 28 years." Bear looked down at the ground, then back at the hospital. "I don't know how to thank all of them." "You already did," Thorne said, "a long time ago." Patricia Miller and Henry Vance were there in the discharge lounge, holding a small welcome home sign. They didn't know him, not really, but they knew what he'd done. They drove him back to his house on Enfield Street. The lawn had been mowed by a neighbor. The fridge was stocked by a church group. The debt was gone. But a story like this leaves marks on everyone it touches. For Dr. Aris Thorne, it was a professional turning point. The hospital administration, while publicly celebrating the miracle, quietly reprimanded him for procedural shortcuts. He was passed over for a department chair position the following fall. He left St. Francis 6 months later for a job at a smaller, community-focused clinic. He says he has no regrets. The calculus changed for him that day. He now spends one afternoon a week doing pro bono work with a medical debt relief nonprofit. For Mark Garrity, the CFO, it was a lesson in public relations over profit. The positive press from the #Stand with Bayer campaign was quantifiable. Donations to the hospital's general charity fund increased by 15% in the next quarter. He approved the creation of a new fast-track charity care protocol for retired first responders with over 20 years of service. It's a small program. It has saved 3 other retirees since. For the anonymous family, they revealed themselves, but only to Bear. A letter arrived at his home a week after his discharge. It was from Michael Miller, the 8-year-old boy from the second-floor apartment, now a 38-year-old finance manager in Boston. He wrote about the matching grant, about the guilt of leaving Hartford, about the family's quiet donation years earlier. He included a phone number. Bear called him. They talked for an hour. No reporters were invited. For the community of Hartford, it was a temporary awakening. A city remembered it was a community. The fire department established a formal liaison to help retiring members navigate health insurance options, a direct result of Bear's case. It's a small fix for a giant national problem. And for Bear Delaney, the physical recovery took a full year. The financial recovery was instant, but the psychological shock lingered. He had prepared himself to lose everything, his home, his savings, his dignity, to the bill. To have it all given back was a disorienting kind of grace. He suffered from what he calls gratitude guilt. Why me? Why was I the one who got caught? He found his answer in a shoe box. Going through old papers during his convalescence, he found a stack of thank you notes from schoolchildren, from families, from the city, notes he'd never thrown away but had never really read. He sat at his kitchen table and read every one. He realized his ledger wasn't filled with dollars and cents. It was filled with lives touched. The community, in its hour of need for him, was simply reading back from his own ledger. The final, surprising detail of this story arrived 18 months later. Bear received a letter from the First Responder Health Fund. With his permission, they had used his case, anonymized, in grant applications. His story had helped them secure a $2 million federal grant to expand their program. The letter included a check for $5,000. A consultant fee, they called it. Bear endorsed the check over to the Hartford Animal Shelter, because that's the kind of man he is. Today, Robert Bear Delaney is 70 years old. He volunteers at that same animal shelter every Tuesday. He speaks occasionally at firefighter retirement seminars about the importance of health insurance. He has dinner with Patricia Miller and her family once a month. Dr. Thorne checks in on him like a primary care physician. The money that saved him is gone, spent, dissolved into the hospital's accounts. What remains is the net it wove, a web of connection that proved that in a broken system, people can still be the repair. The hook of this story was a surgeon's silence, a phone call, and a bill erased in an hour. The payoff is quieter. It's a man sitting on his porch at sunset, debt-free, surrounded not by wealth, but by the living receipts of a lifetime of service. It's the proof that the safety net we often fear isn't there is sometimes woven, thread by thread, from the gratitude we forgot we'd earned. The 90 minutes that changed his life didn't just pay a bill. They answered a question we all ask in the dark. Did any of it matter? For Bear Delaney, the receipt came 30 years late, but it arrived exactly when he needed it most. So what does the story of Bear Delaney actually prove? On one hand, it's a breathtaking anomaly, a perfect storm of archived gratitude, a doctor's defiance, and a community's memory aligning in a single miraculous hour. It's the exception that highlights the brutal rule. For every bear, there are countless others who face that same silence from a surgeon and hear only the echo of their own financial ruin. The system did not save him. People did. People working within, around, and in spite of the system. His story isn't a blueprint for fixing American healthcare. It's a flashlight in a dark room, showing what's already there, buried under bureaucracy. The legal framework for charity care, the nonprofits in the shadows, the dormant memories of kindness waiting for a prompt. We have all the pieces, they just rarely connect. This is the lingering question. Was Bear Delaney saved because he was a hero, or because his heroism was documented? What happens to the quiet, ordinary lives of service that go unrecorded? The nurse, the teacher, the neighbor who shows up. Do they get a network when their body fails? Our safety net shouldn't require a newspaper clipping from 30 years prior to activate. Perhaps the real takeaway is about ledger keeping. We live in a culture that meticulously tracks financial debt and credit scores, but has no system for moral capital, no way to quantify a life of showing up. Bear's community performed an audit on that hidden ledger and found him solvent. It makes you wonder what our own ledgers look like and who might read them back to us in our hour of need. The challenge this story leaves us with is not to wait for a crisis to build that ledger. It's to be the person who shows up, quietly, consistently, without expectation of return. It's to know that the paramedic who treats you today, the firefighter who checks your smoke alarm, the stranger who helps you change a tire, they are all making deposits in an invisible bank. And one day, they may need to make a withdrawal. Will their community have kept track? Bear's 90-minute miracle was the payout, but the investment took a lifetime. In a world that often feels fractured and transactional, that's the stubborn, hopeful math. Kindness compounds. Community is a verb. And sometimes, the most important insurance policy you can have is the one you wrote for others, long before you knew you'd need it yourself. If you want more real stories that explore the hidden connections in our lives, the kind that truly matter when everything else falls apart, then do us a solid. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and it helps us keep finding and telling these stories. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought. And remember, the next time you have the chance to help, to show up, to be a link in someone's chain, do it. You never know when the chain might circle back to you. Thanks for watching.